Hey everyone. Um, Welcome to the stream. Uh, yeah, Elf raiding me like right before I go live. Thoroughly distracting. Um, Hope everyone's doing well. Today, I'm gonna be working on some more of my Magical Girl anime role playing game. Um, Finally getting a chance to get into it after a bit of a long hiatus. Following our first playtest. So I have a bunch of like playtest feedback stuff that I can incorporate. Um, the most, I feel like the best stuff I got out of the playtest, or at least the most obvious stuff to work with, was to do with character creation. So that's where I want to start. Um, because there was like stuff around like the best way to order it and that it needed more structure. I mean, yeah, I need to get Adam to actually like give me the notes that he took, um, because I'm sure that he didn't say everything that he was thinking in there, and I know that there are lots of problems. Um, so yeah, I'm gonna start with the easy stuff, which is just like restructuring the character creation flow, and then and the like team creation flow especially, and then I'm gonna move on to basically redoing all of the basic moves. I'm gonna like scrap pretty much everything I made. Um, I have a thought for doing something kind of like reworking, but something similar to the hypnotic move from the Skinner in Apocalypse World. Uh, Not so much in terms of like a move where someone hypnotizes someone else, but just the way the move is structured. I really like, and I was like rewatching some old like VODs and stuff, and Austin Walker kind of pointed out how cool the move was, and it got me thinking about ways to use that kind of like shared pool of some kind of resource like hold, um, which would be the case in the example, right, where you hold three with someone, and then each of you can spend the hold to do different things. And I found that a really interesting idea for a move I want to have about like when two of the PCs are like dramatically fighting each other, like sorry, not like fighting like fist fights, but like when they are like you know being shitty rivals to one another, or like arguing, bickering, etc., and ways to like use that to play forward into something interesting, um, as well as potentially having like team level, squad level resources that people make use of in a similar way. But I like the idea of hypnotic being like you enter into a state where you have this thing, this like charge that you then need to deal with, um, which I think is perfect for the idea of like, oh, like you and me we're like fighting now. We're in this like state and we need to like resolve it. And I like the idea of having like some ways to resolve it. Um, like having the characters apologize to one another, or having it like play out in inopportune, or like moments that are relevant and interesting, right, in ways to like push that inter-character conflict into being like a thing that a session can be about. So that's what part two of today's thing is going to be about. But for like the first hour, and I'm going to try to be more structured today and only do like 2 hours, so that it doesn't get too long and drawn out. But in the first hour, I want to reorganize and like tighten up the team creation and character creation like list choice stuff. Um, a lot of this is actually just going to be reordering it, because we had some really good insight in the playtest about like which of these were actually the most useful prompts, um, and like what here actually helps people make good decisions, and which of these ideas or these tags like snowball the best. And so this one This one was actually really, really good. People, folks in the playtest were like really stoked on this one. The idea of like what it is that we're fighting, and having this figured out helped fill out this other stuff a lot more quickly. Things that we want to do late in it are stuff like, I feel like this one wants to go like towards the end. I'm just kind of gonna throw these around. And like Transcendence should come pretty late, I think. But detailing what it is that you're fighting, I think, is the most interesting. And then doing this stuff later. So we're actually going to bump this up. And move this down. And I'm going to reorder these things. And this, may not seem like the biggest change, but I think it's going to do a lot to like refocus what we're doing. And I'm gonna change the wording here. So like the darkness we face, like this section initially, rather than just having it be like the bad guys, I want this to be the situation. So we can get into the details of like who we are after we establish a situation. And so this is like, something I should have realized previously, but like this is something that Burning Wheel or Blades in the Dark, those kinds of games do excellently. The idea of like, what is the external stuff first? What is our context? And then let's make characters that, engage with that context in an interesting way, instead of just like, because you can't like make an interesting character in a vacuum, right? They are only interesting by merit of how they butt up against the world, and especially in this game where it's like really about the like oppression of the world and how that connects into the characters and how they, about like their feelings about the world at large. If you don't know what that is, you can't come up with a character who is going to be in a state of friction with it. So this was just like, it feels really obvious to me now that we have like had this conversation with the playtesters of like, oh yeah, it makes sense. This is what it is. I don't think I necessarily need to change like the heading here. And the Celestial Kingdom, this is like the name of the playbook, of the like team playbook. But I need to reword this and then reorganize my tags. So so maybe we'll change this to detail the situation. The nature of the darkness. And I still like all of these prompts a lot. I think these ones were really great and evocative. I feel like this is bad. We're just gonna hide this. So detail the situation. So we want to talk about where the darkness comes from, its origin. So maybe I want to do like by column, so I can do like a darkness column and then a us column, but the darkness column is on the left, so we do it first. Yes, Light Quills, this was an idea that I came up with like it's so funny how much of this is starting to feel like Blades, when a lot of the ideas that I was coming up with were like before I had read the rules for Blades. Um, but I guess it just shows how like one, how good John's ideas are, um, that they like flow naturally when you're trying to adapt to, because I think ultimately the fiction that we're trying to make is similarly structured. So like one, it just shows that John is amazing and smart, and then just that there's something, I don't know, something in the air. But regardless, yes, I'm doing like a, so similarly to how in Blades you have like a crew playbook, we're gonna have like a team playbook. The team playbook is more gonna be about delivering like stuff like the situation, and tying the characters together. It will have some mechanics, and I think like a lot of the like battle stuff might live in here, or at the very least, it's going to be a way that we can unify how we, describe all of our characters when they do all of the like battle stuff. But it's also going to cover stuff like what the players' obligations are. Like, do they all work at the same company, or do they all, go to the same high school, or what? Yes, I think that's a fair point, right? Like, and that's something that I want this playbook to um, elucidate a little bit, is like what the fuck is it that we're doing here, right? Like, what are we fighting? Um, Sorry if y'all are getting notification noises. I can't turn them off right now. Um, yeah, and then so those who fight the darkness. I don't know, whatever. Poetic bullshit. The team. We're just gonna do the team for now. I'm having trouble thinking of good fancy words. So do I like the structure? I feel like the columns is not going to work. I'm going to push this further away and just not think about it yet. So we want to talk about the nature of the darkness first. So this is like a very vague descriptor, but a really evocative one. And then we want to, I think, agenda and then origin. I think like the order was actually completely backwards to what it should be. I think this is going to be the strongest way to do it. Pull that and delete this text layer, and nope. And do it like this. Yeah, Games from the Wildwood, I think that's a really good point, right? Is like, how do we let them choose their poison, essentially? And also, how do I make it so that this playbook, because, like, this is something that I feel like a lot of folks always do with their game groups, but that, is not, it's not a given that everyone will, and it's something that, given the themes of the game I'm trying to make and all that kind of stuff, I would want to guide people into doing this, which is the whole idea of like talking about the content that we want to include before we play, and that overall I just want to try to be more upfront and explicit about a lot of that kind of stuff that goes unsaid in games. So, like, I don't think I want to have an explicit list of, like, you know, the bad stuff is about, like homophobia or like transphobia or whatever. Like, I don't want to just like detail a bunch of like have an explicit list of shitty things. I don't feel like that's necessarily the way to do it. Including something in here, which like I don't know if I have a good idea for it yet, but I think it's a great thing to kind of like let percolate, is the idea of including within this procedure a way where we can talk about a place where we can talk about that, right? Where it's like, and now is the time in team creation where you talk about like the kinds of, badness themes that are going to be in your game, and whether or not, you want to have your setting include these things. I mean, it's difficult in a one shot also to immediately like make it super shit, and it doesn't have to be like ultra bad. Like in Sailor Moon, it's not like every day that they go to school it's just constant abject misery. There's like good stuff happening, but then there are also these like specific, like usually involving specific characters, these like bad things that come up. And our playtest was very short in terms of like how much actual play we got to do. It was mostly character creation and then like a little bit of trying out the moves and stuff. And, it was immediately apparent to me that a lot of the moves didn't work and that, play just wasn't going to proceed very well. And so I wanted to cut it short because, it like the people attending were all great role players and could have like jammed about and had fun, but it was feeling less and less useful for me as we went forward with it, because it was clear that like the mechanics weren't actually working and doing anything, and therefore it was just playing pretend, which is great and all, but not the point of the exercise. So yeah, like certainly it would not be clear from there, but the idea is that we establish a status quo first, and then we start pushing and having the NPCs be the things that give voice to that. So that would, I feel like, come through in our MC principles and our MC moves, which is a really important part of the game design to remember, right? Is that like it doesn't all live here. A lot of it is going to live behind the curtain with the MC and their moves, because this is a Powered by the Apocalypse game, and so the MC has explicit moves that they will use but never say the name of. Yeah, and like I don't know if I want to detail it in here. I mean, like these choices initially, where we're talking about like what it is that we're fighting against, right? Like this already says a lot about the kinds of bad stuff that are going to come up. Like if the nature of the darkness is to order the universe, then we already know that it's going to be about like that it has some idea of an ordering of things and of categorizing things, and that it's going to seek to do that behavior, and that therefore we would expect our characters to in some way defy that kind of logic, right? Whether that be that they themselves defy categorization, like obvious examples would be stuff around like gender identity, right? Where the like part of ordering the universe is that there are men and women or whatever bullshit like that. Or maybe ordering the universe is about like social class or whatever. That's something that we're going to talk about in detail over the course of this, because like we select the tag and that's not the end of it. There's going to be a conversation that's happening, and it's the MC's job to just be like, oh, okay, it wants to order the universe, that's great, and then ask some questions, and then they're going to develop some notes. Like we can't structure everything, and so in this example where our darkness wants to order the universe, then we're going to talk, okay, well, like, what's its agenda? Like, how is it going about doing this? Because then this further narrows that stuff. So, like, it wants to, like, re-terraform the planet, let's say, is its goal. So then we understand, okay, so it has this, like, idea of there being an order to the universe, and how that is expressing itself is that this is a group that is trying to re-terraform the planet. And we go, okay, well, what does that mean? And that might involve, like, people can stay around, but they have to change in order to fit in this new thing. And that would be that they need to, all behave a certain way, or, they all become the, like, underclass. Like, we want to make this about, like, class violence. And so, like, okay, cool. So this outside force has this idea of there's, like, an order to the universe. There's a specific hierarchy that should be in place, and the characters are all obviously anarchists. They want to re-terraform the planet, and part of that includes, keeping humanity around, or, like, mundane people around as a, like, the lowest class. Cool, okay. And so our characters want to, defend the everyday people and not allow this, darkness to render them all slaves, essentially. And so what's the origin of this thing? Like, where did this darkness come from? Is it rebels and usurpers? So, like, that one doesn't really fit, right? Because we're talking about how they want to, like, do this whole class thing, and it doesn't really make sense for us to be, king of the anarchists or queens of the anarchists. So maybe they are interstellar invaders, right? Would make a lot of sense in this particular case. Or travelers from a dark future would actually be awesome. So they think all of these past people are just as, like, drudges, and they just want to rule over them with their future science. And then we're like, cool, okay, so we know what we're fighting against. And then we answer with, what the fuck are we? Right? So we would want to be, maybe we're an ancient kingdom dedicated to, like, preserving the liberty of people, and the idea is, like, that there's no class or whatever else. Or hidden magical kingdom, whatever. All those ones kind of working that way. Or we're from, like, a parallel timeline, and we want to prevent these future people from messing with, maybe we're the freaking time police, maybe that's why we're coming into this. And then we would choose our roles for the various, like, and this is one where each player actually pulls one out of the list. Whereas this one here is for, like, the whole team, right? So let's see if this is, like, a logical sequence to things. If we still want to go origin, roles, obligations. Right, like, maybe we're from a parallel timeline, and we are some kind of, like, either rebels against those invading, like, future people or whatever. And then, yeah, you can be, like, a lowly servant would be a great role for someone to have, right? Where they're, like, they used to be entangled with the dark people and were enslaved by them and have, like, broken free, or we've rescued them or whatever. And we have, a loyal knight trying to fight and protect people, and maybe we're led by, like, a high priest, and we're some kind of religious organization, and someone is the rival to the loyal knight, and that's our, like, squad of 4. And then we would go into, like, what our cover operation is. So, the default one being we all go to high school. Great. And we would talk about, like, what is it like to go to high school? Like, how are we disguising ourselves? When we talk about, all this stuff which I'm, like, figuring out and making up is part of a conversation when we're actually playing. And then lastly, we have, like, a spot where this is all going down. Like, we have our clubhouse or our space, which is our own. Because I think that's really important for the characters to have a location that is reflecting their team and their identity. Yeah, like maybe we need to detail more of the mundane world here, and that goes in between these two chunks, right? So it's like what we're fighting, what we're fighting over, and then lastly, who the hell we are and how we fit into that. So maybe that's the way to go. So we're going to talk about the situation, which is also going to include the mundane world. See, so now this feels like we're getting somewhere. I'm just going to duplicate this text field and then edit it. Boom. Or maybe this should be the mundane world. And then yeah, okay, cool. I've got my little smaller text now. Yeah, like do a bit of point counterpoint. I don't know necessarily how feasible that is. But like, what are the kinds of things that we want to detail with the mundane world? I mean, I kind of feel like the whole point of the mundane world is that it is something that we all already know what it is. You know, like this is the land of not make believe. This is what we're setting everything within that world of make believe. But then this is just like the same as our everyday life. But we could do things like location, right? We can have some location tags, which would be things like a big city, a small town. What are some other interesting ways that we could set this? And this is just like, where the basic, like, typical stuff of the world is happening. This is not going to be our, like, because we have our hideout, right, which can be like an ancient temple or a star chamber or an overlooked place or a crossroads or a majestic castle or whatever. And so this just needs to be like banal setting stuff, and this can be like a bunch of tags, and we pick some of them. So we'll do like massive corporations. Authoritarian state. State meaning like the government. Maybe I'll just write government. This isn't really location, though. This is just like things about the mundane world. Religious persecution. Always a good one. Class struggle. And like, the mundane world can still be a made up mundane world, but it will have a lot of the elements of it will just be very familiar. In terms of like where the oppression comes from, it's like you know, easy stuff would be authority, you know, figures in authority and stuff. But like whatever the player's peer group is always actively engaged in perpetuating it. Um, Although not as like your peer group is not as cognizant of the fact that they are perpetuating it. It's not a deliberate thing. It's just a like that's what people in societies do is they like tacitly perpetuate or like you know passively perpetuate shitty behaviors. Um, we could fix the setting. We could like pull blades if we wanted to, but I'm not super keen on that because I like the idea of being able to have different team playbooks that have different settings and that span um, and that have different tones, right? Like I would love for there to be a Steven Universe setting, which is much more lighthearted and like where the oppressive elements are less severe or less direct, like they're more subtly cued and more softly cued, and then we can have the like, you know, magical girl Madoka thing where it's just like everything's super dark and fucked up, and you know somewhere in the middle you're like Sailor Moon. Yeah, so like I don't want to quite go so far as like a fixed setting because then I have to do all this like world building shit that I'm not super interested in. But it's gonna have different tags, right? Um, these ones right now are very typical. Um, it might be that in the you know like in the other ones we're going to include some different shit, and like all of this together is going to make us a very interesting setting and one that is unique to the players playing the game, which is in my mind ideal. Just trying to get caught up on all the chat stuff. Yeah, we'll just do like a rural community. I think is a reasonable counterpoint to like a small town. This is different. This is like you're really in the sticks, and like there's not even a town. They're just like some houses here and there kind of thing. Um, Small town can still be. I don't know. I feel like it's different. It's not necessarily strictly rural either. Um, a futuristic arcology, just to add a little sci-fi kind of thing. Anyways, we got some mundane world shit. And these are like tags for that. What else would we want to detail about the mundane world? We've got some kind of like broad strokes stuff about like explicit like setting of location, but then also the broader setting of like, you know, is there a shitty government? Is there some shitty religious persecution happening? Also, framing this as religious persecution means it can go either way. It can either be the religion persecuting people or, you know, the other way around. Yeah, not as detailed as Duskfall, but I mean, so like our obligations are narrow enough. Yeah, let's do some like taboos. I think this is an interesting thing to put in. So like, here's where we could list maybe. I don't know. I'm like on the fence about whether or not we want something like this, where it's just like these are the things that the society does not accept. Which, you know, you could describe this as like the cultural norms as well, but I want to focus on the stuff that it doesn't like, and then the stuff that it does like. And again, these are all just prompts, so they're not going to be too specific, but just like gender, sexuality. I mean, do we even need to say sexuality? I feel like that comes through in gender sometimes, sometimes not. We'll put in sexuality. It's so broad. It's just so broad, the kind of stuff I would want to include here. and I don't want people to get like overly specific with them either. They need to be pretty sweeping so that they can, you know, apply really liberally. This is why I'm like not, I don't know, I don't feel like I have any good ideas about how to make this work. So I'm just going to put a question mark and move on. Do we define some taboos? Do we define some culturally encouraged behaviors? We can just put encouraged behaviors. Yeah, do I want to detail it? Do we want to like give some options for some of these? So we define the mundane world, and then lastly we go into who we are and what we're about. Oh, for some reason I'm in the font field. There we go. And then we detail some shit about our team. And yeah, like this needs some more stuff going on in it, but I don't have good thoughts for it now. Yeah, having some like explicitly defined, you know, like as Games from the Wildwood says, like some reified behaviors could be good. I just don't know of like the best language to use to describe that. So for now, I'm going to leave these just with question marks, and I'll come back to them when I have done some thinking about it and made some notes. I don't want to just like fumble through it at the moment. Oh god, I changed my fonts. No. Don't change the fonts. This should all be in Lato. There we go. Okay. Well, we're gonna save this. I mean, I feel like the procedure, I haven't like written out the procedure in a way that's going to give people a better structure, but we've got the ordering figured out. And you know, maybe that's enough to just say like, pick this from this list, pick this from this list. Yeah, Sawmello, I think the idea of just having a big list of behaviors and then deciding which ones are good and which ones are bad. Although, so here's why actually I'm going to say I don't like the idea of having a list of behaviors that can go either way. Because ultimately what I want to do here is make statements about the world as it is, right? And so if we play in a setting, like I would never want anyone to play this game in a way where like they live in a society where everyone is gay and they're the only straight people and like that's why they're oppressed, because I think that's total bullshit. I'm just going to come out right now and say that is complete horseshit. I would never want that to be in my game. Because that is just like so blind to what is actually going on in like the world that we are all living in right now, that like if I make a game where you can do that, what am I saying at that point? Like what am I even about, right? And to me that just feels really like contrary to my purpose. And like I would never want to encourage any situation in which, you know, the most privileged category of people can then go play around at being like, it just feels really like tokenizing and fucked up. I don't know, tokenizing maybe not the right word, but anyways, it feels like this weird like oppression tourism vibe when people start doing that. What I want this game to be about is about like finding empathy for like real categories of people who really are oppressed in the real world, and so you know dancing around that by making up this world where everything is inverted just feels weird. It just doesn't quite feel correct. So part of why I'm so hesitant around this stuff is that this is like a very delicate notion. This one right here, this is really loaded, and like I want to be very careful about what I say about this stuff, how I handle this kind of content, because ultimately this is like one of the core like things that I want to do in the game is get people thinking about this stuff in particular ways and finding more empathy than maybe they had going in. And it's really easy to fuck that up. And also really easy to have it drift so far outside of like the real world that it loses relevance. Because ultimately, this game is about the real world, even though it's set in a fantastical one or in a made-up one. And we don't want to lose that. So I'm going to table this for now. We've reorganized some things. We've made some thoughts. We've added some new elements. I'm going to like let this percolate and come back to it. I haven't been like anyone watching like through these videos or whatever will be like, oh, it seems like Andrew hasn't been thinking about it much in between one and the other. And I haven't, and it's been like 3 or 4 weeks since we had our playtest. So I'm a little bit out of touch with it, and I need to like slowly re-immerse myself in the material and get my mind working on it again. But I'm going to switch over to doing some moves stuff now. Because that is the thing that I had an actual brainwave about, and so I want to strike while the iron is hot. So, the move from Apocalypse World, which I want to use as a kind of framework for what I'm going for, is called Hypnotic. When you have time in solitude with someone, they become fixated on you. You roll some dice. You get to either 2 or 3 hold. And they can spend their hold by giving you something you want, acting as your eyes and ears, fighting to protect you, doing something you tell them to. Now, what's interesting about this, right, is that you have hold on them, and they spend your hold at a 1-to-1 to do those things. And then there's a like distinguishing thing between NPCs and PCs, which is not relevant for this one, or this thing that I'm trying to make right now. And then you can like, distract people or give people +1. So there are elements. It's an asymmetrical move about a relationship between 2 people. And what I want to make with this framework is, and the last important element is on a miss, they hold 2 over you on the exact same terms. So there's like a directionality to it. There's a person who like initiates this move happening, and they, as a result of that, have a certain type of power, and there's a like resource that gets formed and connects those 2 players, right, which is another thing that the move is making, and then there are ways in which the players can spend those resources that are different. And those are all really, really interesting, and those say a lot about how people get along. Let me just bring up a PDF of Apocalypse World so I can have it on screen and we can like talk about it. Also, we can see if anything changed in the second edition. Doop, 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 doop. Skinner. Hypnotic. So this is our shit right here. Looks like this move is exactly the same. So I'm going to just copy it out of this PDF and make a text field and plop it in there and make it bigger so we can all read it. And so we want to do a little bit of analysis of this move so that we really understand it. And then we're basically going to hack it. Let's move this up so it's clear. It's funny, there are clearly some like special characters being used in the PDF version to do certain like sequences of letters, like this N thing, which is actually a TH. I wonder what the origin of that particular quirk is. Okay, so when you have time in solitude with someone, they become fixated upon you. The trigger for it, the important stuff here is that this is something that one character does to another character, right? This is like a thing that you point at someone. And so the move I want to make is about characters having that like dramatic, you know, we're fighting and we need to like figure this out over the course of the episode, and you know, like we're gonna figure it out right at the, you know, climax, and that epiphany is gonna let us like beat the bad thing. You know, I want to make a move that encapsulates that kind of play or fiction. I want to generate that kind of fiction with this move. So instead of this being like making people fixate on you, it's going to be about like becoming in a fight with someone. And so one character is going to choose to initiate this, you know, state of conflict. And then we need to think about, like what dice are being rolled, like which stats, and how that all plays out. But that can come last. That is the absolute least important part of the move is this. This is the least important part. The things that are interesting are this idea of they can spend your hold. Very, very cool, right? This idea that there's like a shared resource that gets spent asymmetrically or like in different ways by the players. And then this stuff is really important. These choices within the game, within the original move, not very interesting, but the decisions we make about what options are available, very important. And this is essentially the same thing. This part we can essentially ignore. This does not matter for us, because my move is not going to have two different versions, one for NPCs, one for PCs. It's just going to have a PC to PC version. So we're just going to like axe this out. However, the division between these two things is important, because what this line is dictating is, you know, who is spending the stuff. And then lastly, and similarly important, is this idea of the inversion of the move on a miss, or the move behaving differently. Actually, you know what? No, not interesting. Not actually interesting. This is about as important as this bit, because this is still just a numbers game. Yeah, sure. On a miss, it inverts. Great. That's fine. So let's talk about what's going on with this move. We've got this idea of like one person decides when it's going to happen. It's a move with agency. It's not just a thing that happens incidentally. Someone chooses to play into it. Um, and then based on based on their role, we get more or less of this currency that is shared by the players. The trigger isn't terribly important in terms of like what it specifically is, um, but more the like broad strokes kind of like framing of the trigger, right? So this is a trigger um, where one person essentially sets up a thing, right? Like when you have time in solitude with someone, like yes, that's totally interesting in Apocalypse World, the idea of like intimacy and all that kind of stuff, because that's a theme in that game. Um, but essentially, the idea here is that most of the time, like occasionally this will get flipped on you, but like 80% of the time, this is going to be the Skinner setting that up, right? It's going to be a little bit of a game of cat and mouse, of like getting some time alone with someone, and so that you can like get this power over them. Um, and so, I mean, all of the triggers for all of the moves um, in Apocalypse World are rooted in fiction, and we never want to lose that. I don't know if I agree with this idea that this move, the trigger for this one, actually like frames the scene. I think it requires a certain type of scene to happen, um, and might push you towards playing that scene, like a certain type of scene. But this kind of thing can also like the opportunity for this move could come up incidentally. Um, like recently, my water bearer took this move, and I ended up using it um, in a scene that was initially framed differently, and I needed to like manipulate circumstances to allow this move to trigger, to set myself up for it. Um, for our trigger, for our like we're fighting move, it's gonna be like the trigger is gonna be about like picking a fight with someone. And I'm not sure how best to describe that yet, but we'll get there. But broad strokes, it's going to be like when you pick a fight with someone. I feel like we might want to have a couple little stipulations of like what actually qualifies and how to make that work. But we're gonna, we'll roll some dice, and then we're gonna generate this pool. Or the other thing that we could do is do it blade style and have it be like it makes a clock, and then people can fill in the clock by behaving certain ways, which maybe is kind of more relevant. Is the idea is that we have like, so the reason I would make that drift is that whereas with the Skinner move, it is about social power, right? It's about like I have this hold over you, you spend it this way to like to do nice things for me, and I spend it to fuck with you. That kind of relationship isn't really going to exist in the game, in my game, because it's not about the characters fighting each other in a like they're not really fighting each other. When they pick a fight with each other, it's not so that they can beat each other at a thing or get something from one another, like exploit a weakness or gain an advantage. Really, they're fighting each other in order to better fight the other thing, right? So like this is a more directorial stance kind of move where it's like, yeah, my character is being a shithead and bickering with your character over some stupid shit, like when clearly we have more important things to do. Like we could be fighting the evil, and here we are instead, bickering about how you stole my boyfriend or whatever, right? Like some mundane trivial nonsense. And also this is really not about that thing, but actually just about our relationship at large, right? As most fights are. It's not ever really about what it's about. It's always about like I'm already at the limit of my patience with you, and then you did this one thing, and so now I'm super mad about that, but really I had all of this anger already, and I'm just funneling it into that. So this move is less about me trying to have power over you the way it was in Apocalypse World, like the move that we're making. Obviously, the hypnotic move is about getting power over people, right? Because like when you use it on NPCs, they can't act against you while they have this hold. And that creates a very different dynamic, right? Because this is like, in the original hypnotic move, it's, you know, you're under the Skinner's thumb and you can do this stuff to get out from under it. Whereas what I want, and why I think I want to go for the clock instead of points to spend, is that really we are entering into this transaction of being in a fight together as part of a mutual goal of beating the monsters later, and of like transforming our relationship by way of this difficult thing. And so, yeah, this is like, this is something that people would both want to do in a lot of cases. It's like productive for both of them. And it's about, you know, this is like a way to provide a carrot for people to play out the kind of fiction that is true to our source material. It's like maybe a little bit heavy-handed, but I don't know if this is necessarily a bad way to do it, because I've never really designed a game before. So we're going to try it this way. And I don't know how hard people will game this system, but so in parallel to this move, we're making a new one. I'm just going to set it up over here. And so this is our new move about fighting, about bickering, really. I'm just going to do a little bit of Photoshop tooling around here while I sort this out. I want these to be out of this group for now. I'm just going to hide everything else. And we're going to work on these. So, Hypnotic from Apocalypse World. Right, so this is what we're basing our move off of. And then we have our new move, which is about bickering. And so in our new move about bickering, we want to have a trigger. And I just want to like explicitly map this out. Trigger. Triggering fiction. Something that one character can do at another character. Because also, like, this is something that maybe there's going to be a like rival figure kind of playbook that's going to be all about doing this kind of shit, and they're going to have, you know, rules that modify this move or motivation to do this more often. Yeah, exactly, Salamello. On gaming the system, I think ideally you make a system whereby the result of it being gamed is that players end up playing out the type of story you want them to. Yeah, so like, as long as this isn't just a like strictly mechanical exchange and the move like generates fiction, then I think it's a win, right? As long as the things that they're going to do to advance this clock, as long as that is cool and rewarding, then it doesn't matter if people are just like, yeah, we got to fight about this and we play out this fiction, you know, like, it won't be the only way to accomplish these things. And I don't want it to like, there will be a tuning thing where like, if this is the absolute best way to get a bunch of mechanical benefits, then people are going to do it all the time potentially, but we'll try to keep that at least somewhat under control. Although generally in a Powered by the Apocalypse game, you don't need to worry about that too much, because the mechanics are one thing and then the fiction is another, right? But it's really important to me that I be consistent in terms of whether or not I write out numbers or use numerals. So we have our triggering action or triggering fiction, something that one character can do at another character. So I want this to be, you know, like you don't you don't really get to have a choice about when someone like starts getting in a fight with you. You have a choice about how you play it, like how you handle this person coming at you with this conflict. But you know, I don't want this to require both players to play into it in order to trigger it. I want this to be able to, for someone to just be like, I'm getting in a fight with you about this. We're going to roll some dice, right? That's the next part of the move. Results of the dice will set a clock. So is it still kind of open? I don't know how much of it, is it like the size of the clock changes based on the roll? Like what is the roll about accomplishing is still an open question. Because the reason we roll dice in Apocalypse World, right, is that if you are good at being hot, you get power over people, and if you are not, they get power over you, and it like there's a distinct, fictional, like beneficial fictional outcome from rolling good, and having like immediate power over people and stuff like that. Whereas in this move, the payoff that we want actually comes when all of the when the clock gets finished, right? And then we're gonna get some kind of bonus or benefit or payout, whatever, right? This is like a project that two players end up embarking on. And so, like what does rolling good mean in this case? Because we're still going to have to play through this clock. Is it that it makes the clock shorter? But then that means we actually get less of the juicy, bickering, whatnot out of it. So maybe that's not where the direction we want to take this move. Like whether or not it involves power for each character, I feel like maybe the thing that the dice result sets is results of the dice determine perception of like blame / responsibility, because I want this to be asymmetrical. And so like one character kind of comes off as a jerk and the other character is in the kind of moral high ground or emotional high ground. One person is the wronged party and the other is the person trying to make amends. And that we take on these prescribed roles and then play out some fiction around that. Clock is always the same time, but the set of actions required to fill it are different. So the miss requires more hurtful action, whereas the 10 plus things stay fairly non-awful. Yeah, like the severity of the argument is set, but then so then here's the question, right? Like, is it better or worse to have the argument be more severe, given that being in an argument is actually a good thing for us, right? Like, that we want to be fighting in order to have this, relationship catharsis form. So it's like, this move is going to be a little bit... It doesn't have the most direct, intuitive kind of vibe that this hypnotic move from Apocalypse World has. Because, everyone kind of wants to be in a fight, whereas not everyone wants to be hypnotized, right? There's a resistance to this effect, presumably. And yeah, I don't ever want to tell anyone, how their character is going to play out being in a fight with someone. So... we could say that if you roll poorly, the fight has to go on longer, and therefore, we get our payout less quickly. That is an option. It doesn't immediately strike me as being awesome, because this also, means that when you roll poorly, you end up with this fight that's going to be really long and drawn out, and maybe it's like not worth pursuing, or there's the idea of like we get more or less fiction out of this move depending on how you roll, and it could become problematic systems wise if this like takes up too much space or extends over too much time. I feel like the role framing, who is broadly perceived as being the like wronged party is the most obvious one to me, but we'll come back to this. Well, actually, we're gonna have to build the move around that because, like, okay, actually, here I've got it, and I've got why this feels like the right way to do it to me. Is that in this, what the role is actually doing is setting role, like ROLE, roles for the two players involved. It's saying, cool, if you roll high, you're in the driver's seat, right? You're the one who has the hold, and people have to try to do these things to get rid of this hold, and you have access to the stick, right? And then on a miss, it's not that like something completely different happens, it's just that it flips who gets the hold. So, similarly, I think that is an element that we absolutely want to keep and carry forward into our move here, is that, right? Because like the most important thing that this is doing is that on a hit, you get to decide, or you get to be the one who is being appeased, and on a miss, you don't. And there's like a degree of it, but I don't think the clock is really going to relate to that for us. Roll some dice. Results of the dice determine perception of blame/responsibility. Give roles for the players in the argument, or well, we'll just say conflict. There is a set clock, regardless of role. We're all fights are going to have the kind of same. They're going to take as long to resolve. Characters can only be in one fight at a time. I think this is just an important little thing to add. So you can only be in one fight at a time, so you're not just like, oh, I'm fighting this person and this person. We have like a million clocks, because of course we could have, so if we had 4 players, we could have player 1 and player 2 are fighting, player 1 and player 3 are fighting, player 1 and player 4 are fighting, player 2 and player 3 are fighting, player 2 and player 4 are fighting, player 4 and 3 are fighting, and and that would be all of them. There's like a whole bunch. It's like 8 or 9. Anyways, it's a lot. It's too many. It's gonna like dilute our fiction. It's gonna be like huge clutter, and then likely this move is actually gonna live in the like grace kind of zone. Or whoops, I actually wanted to show page 2. Because grace lets you like pull stuff off and end up being the... Grace is like the hot in my game, and I feel like it's analogous enough that it is an appropriate thing. Right, because this isn't about whether or not you're right or wrong or anything like that. It's just about the perception of blame versus responsibility. And so, like, you know how sometimes you haven't done anything wrong, but someone is still mad at you, and it's just like you find yourself like apologizing to them even though you don't mean it, that kind of thing. Like, I think that's a neat way to have this move play out, that it's just like someone ends up being the bad guy, and it has less to do with what actually happened and more to do with like how people are reacting and how they're using their like social leverage. Yeah, like it's about how the people can position themselves, um, which is a nice little cynical thing for me to say about human relationships. Um, okay, so far I think we're establishing some good, like structure for this move. So then, based on your roll, you can fill the clock by doing prescribed things. Maybe you get payouts for doing them. Maybe payout is for both characters once the argument resolves. And then it can be that like for each segment you put your character's initial in, and the person who has like filled out more like comes away with more stuff. So it could be that this move is about like a setup for like the two of us kind of end up in like a friendly race to like fill this thing up as quickly as possible and like resolve it. But I think also like the timing of resolving it could matter. Like the triggers for when you can fill in the clock could be, there could be like big ones that happen, like you can fill in more segments if you do it at a like critical time, or like reward people for kind of playing against their own interests and that kind of stuff. Yeah, and like Games for the Wild says, like I feel like the rival doesn't use grace for it. Like they get a stat sub where they use, because I figure the rival, who's kind of like the Sailor Mars kind of figure, right? Like they would be more of a courage kind of character. Like they're just like forceful and direct and like fiery, angry, etc. Maybe they're a playbook with a lot of grace, because sometimes the rival characters are really alluring. Like, and I mean, this is like the biggest trope of anime that I can imagine is the like rival character. But like in Gundam, whatever his name is, in the Pink Zaku, is like, this mysterious, like masked, beautiful figure. And like, actually, a real rival playbook character would be Darien, right? Like Tuxedo Mask, he's really hot. He's the hottest shit. And part of what makes him hot is being all like aloof and moody. And so like, like at the very least you would kind of enter into like the ghoul space where you have the like disaffected move where you're being all like aloof and whatever is actually alluring to people. We could go down that kind of route where they would like stat sub. But certainly they're all about like getting, like they get to be really enticing, like dramatic and alluring, despite being kind of shitty, right? Like that's kind of a rival thing. But yeah, disaffected, when you turn someone on rolled with cold, right? Like that type of move feels like a good fit for the like rival space. So maybe they, maybe they get some similar stat subs like Games from the Wildwood is suggesting. And yeah, there's also like the Battle Babe has the use Hex to go aggro against PCs, whereas for NPCs it's cool. But with player characters, it's about your relationship, giving you leverage over them to be like, or I guess really what it is like, it's based on whether or not you understand them, that you can push them. What that move has to say, I kind of disagree with, because I think it actually would be really interesting to have it be like an inversion of the other person's Hex, where it's like, if they know you really well, it doesn't work because they know that you're not really going to do it or something. I feel like that's kind of what's implied by the move, but that the mechanics don't quite deliver that. But maybe that's just me misinterpreting it. So anyways, back to back to what we're working on here. Um, we've got to like imagine the whole arc of this move, right? And start thinking about how we want to have this play out. So there is a thing that we do to like start this fight with someone, which although I like have a really strong feeling about what that would mean, I would have a lot of trouble explicitly writing it out, and I got to think of like the right words to describe it. Um, and that's just one of those things of like when you actually have to write a rule about something, it really like I feel like I know what it is, but then I go to think of the words, and it's not clear how to like make this a mechanic. So we're gonna leave that on the shelf for now. But we do something where we pick a fight with someone, and then we roll some dice, and the results of the dice determine the perception of blame/responsibility, and give roles to myself, the triggering player, and the player who is my target. Regardless of the results, a clock gets established. And characters can only be in one fight at a time, which means with 4 players, there can be a maximum of 2 fights. Player 1 and 2 and player 3 and 4, or player 1 and 4 and player 2 and 3 fighting. Or whatever, all the different permutations, but there can only be 2. And in a game of 5 players, there can still only be 2. Someone gets left out of the fight. And fights can only involve 2 players. Like, clearly, by the way of how this works thus far. But it's nice. I feel like it's good to like explore like, well, what does it mean? Yeah, like only 2 people can be fighting each other and not other people in addition. So it's like fights are between me and one other player. One thing we haven't looked at is the range of results. So we haven't talked about like, I feel like a 10 up and a miss are pretty clear, right? Like you get your desired position, and then your opponent gets the one that you want them to have, and on a miss, that is inverted. And whether or not those are prescribed by the move is an important question. So, like, is it that on a 10-up I choose which role I take? Because maybe I just, like, want to come off as the bad guy, or I want to be the one apologizing. I start the fight, but I end up being the person who needs to make amends for it as well, is my goal. Or do we want to have it be like, if you roll high, you always get this result? I feel like that one speaks the strongest, right? Like, that if we step back from that position, we are waffling slightly. But then, yeah, how do we do a 7 to 9? What is the, like, muddy success of what sounds like a very binary setup, right? Of like one person is this way and the other person is this way. I definitely in my game like having moves that are about like empowering targets of things. So this suggestion of on a 7 to 9 the other player makes the judgment, or the other players make the judgment, I think is good. Although it raises the question, like, why do we even have dice in this move? Do we need to have dice in this move? Maybe there are no dice in this move. Maybe what it is when you pick a fight with someone, they, like, everyone else at the table decides who the bad guy is. Like, who is being a jerk here. Would be a way that you could play it. It could just be like down to like people talk about it and decide. It's less cut and dry. It leads to more squabbliness at the table. But it's legit. Avery made a entirely diceless hack of Apocalypse World, and it works. So like there are ways to make this kind of stuff happen. But I feel like including the dice is probably the way we want to go, and I think having the dice do it hard. So like 10 up means this specific thing, a miss means this specific thing, and then yeah, having the 7 to 9 result open it up to the rest of the group can be interesting, I think. Okay, roll some dice. And let's clarify this. So, on a 10 plus, how do we want to describe these two roles? So one is where you have the social power in the argument and they need to make it up to you. And see, it's not even like, this isn't even picking a fight. This is like almost like you air a grievance you have with someone, right? And then like they have to make up for it or make it up to you. Because it feels like this is more about like getting apologies and like making other people make amends. On a 10 plus, you are the wronged party and your target must make amends. There's a clock regardless of the results of the roll. Cool. On 10 plus, you were the wrong party and your target must make amends. On a 7 to 9, the other characters must decide who has been wronged. On a miss, you come off as a jerk and must make amends to your target. And yeah, it's going to be like when you call someone out for doing something hurtful or whatever. Cool. So we have our role structure. I feel like, like regardless of the result, we kind of get what we want, which is to have this like fight play out. And so we need to color it more so that there are like different things that we get based on what role we're in. But also like, I don't want any like hard PvP in my game because it doesn't fit with like how the game works. So the move where we get in a fight is actually very soft, and I think that's just fine that it be that way. I have faith that other people can come up with a consensus and that people can play nice. Maybe that is misplaced. If I feel I need it, I can definitely add a clause. If no one can agree, the MC decides. And just leave it like that, where it's like, y'all better come to a consensus or the MC is just going to say, and their word stands, and you can't argue at that point. It would be my preference that people just like talk to each other and come to a consensus. And like, this isn't a matter of like people vote. This is a matter of like everyone comes to a consensus, which means that we talk about it until we all agree that there is one answer, whatever that is. And that like that discussion is in and of itself an interrogation of the fiction, because we talk about, what we're seeing going on. If it turns into a discussion, it might be that everyone's just like, well, obviously it's this. And I think that the power in this case does lie with the person accusing, like leveling this move at someone else, because they're going to start by describing like how they were wronged. Yeah, I mean, we could, depending on how this clock and stuff works, the idea that like both people fulfill the like apology role could be legit as well. It's going to take a little more figuring and like fleshing out of the move. We might come back to this and totally change it based on what we end up doing further down the line. And then based on your role, you can fill the clock by doing prescribed things. Maybe payout is for both characters once the argument resolves, or maybe you get payout for doing these things. Uncertain at this point. So what are some things that we can do to clear boxes in this clock? I agree that I like the idea of both people being the like apologizers. However, I don't know what that actually means yet. And maybe I will like it less once we come up with the rest of the move. Because if the person apologizing doesn't get any payout, then if they're both apologizing, this is just like a useless undertaking, and then we'll just like leave it unresolved forever. So, what are some things that we do to resolve this argument? And like, if you are not the wronged party, or sorry, if you are the wronged party, like, right, like I can imagine a lot of stuff that like, because it feels like you're in a more passive role and you're just like embracing their, they're just like giving you shit, whatever it is, right? Like they are appeasing you and you are in this position of, like soft power where you can just wait and let it happen. But I would like for there to be active things for both people to do. And at the moment, the other thing that bothers me about this move is that it feels really like you get away so clean if you roll high. You're just like, yeah, you wronged me. I don't have to do shit. All right, like that's like the emotional resonance in it for me is like. But what I would like to have to say about this move is that like, even if someone does you wrong, you still need to do work because you have a relationship with them that you have to develop. So there should totally be stuff that we can do. I definitely like the idea that like both parties need to contribute, and that there's like the idea that they need to like keep pace with each other somehow. But like the mechanics on this are really eluding me. It feels really open-ended right now. So we'll start with wronged party can do these things. So like an obvious one is offer forgiveness. I don't know if I spelled that right. It looks weird as a word. But I mean, that almost seems too easy, right? Because you're just like, oh, I picked this fight with you. Nah, it's okay. I changed my mind, right? Like, it doesn't feel like you're actually processing anything if you just immediately turn around and are just like, hey, no, it's cool. I'm sorry that I made you upset by, stating my needs and stuff like that. So I think what actually we can do is get a little bit of the like nonviolent communication and conflict resolution skill set going on in here. So you can state an unfulfilled need to the we need a good, so we have the wronged party, and then what's our counterpoint to the wronged party? Anyways, what do I say to the other player? So this is like, you did this bad thing to me, and so like what I need from you is for you to like do this or that, or like say these things to me. Like I want you to like, because you did this thing to me, I feel this way. Um, so yeah, we can like state or describe how the other player, how the other PC made you feel when they did the thing. Describe to the other PC how they made you feel when they did the thing. State an unfulfilled need to the other player. Blowass, I really love... Okay, when I say your name that way, I don't love that part. But anyways, maybe actions are limited to how far along the clock is. And then just writing this, I realize this is a bad idea, but it might inspire a better one. Totally a good way to think about things. So this one's going to set up the clock, and then they have to do other stuff, and my hope is that this other stuff that they do will be like other moves, right? That this blows. I'm just going to say blows, so I don't say the word ass preceded by the word blow. But like, that's how we get to good results, right? With what you're saying of like, here's this idea. I know that this idea isn't quite good, but does this idea lead to somewhere else? That's most of what this process has been for me, where I'm making stuff and then I'm like, oh, this is crap, I have to throw this away. But having made that, I then get, another better idea or something like that. So that is absolutely part of the process. Yeah, my hope is that these things that I'm going to write here are basically going to be fictional triggers for other moves, right? And like, when I say fictional triggers for other moves, I don't mean like this is precisely this move, but like doing this thing will almost invariably be a way where you would trigger a different move. Or at the very least, it's a scene where we like interrogate the fiction, essentially. We expose your character's inner world because you have to describe to the other PC, you have to like confront the other player about your emotions and talk to them about it. Which, in real life is how I resolve a lot of my conflicts, is by telling people about my feelings, and also telling them about my like emotional needs and stuff like that. So I would love for this move to actually kind of act as a like, hey, here's how you can like actually solve problems in your life. I would love for it to reflect that. And so like, this is, you are like venting your feelings, but not like venting, more like being like, hey, let's have like, this one is about like establishing empathy and rapport with the person who has wronged you. I also like the idea that like, if you are the wronged party, you still have these responsibilities to like you still have to be really accountable about your feelings and shit, in order to make this thing work. I still think that's very important. So state an unfulfilled need to the other player. So this is like, well, yeah, the whole reason that when you said this, I felt bad is because like, for the past few weeks we like haven't been hanging out, and I just feel like we're drifting apart or whatever, right? Like, and like, I guess you could say that as being this first one, but so then to really make it stating a need, it would be like why can't we just like hang out some more like we used to or whatever? You can kind of like express things that your character wants, and the unwritten part of this is that you're basically asking that other person for it. And furthermore, stuff like this or this feeds stuff for the other character to do, right? Because you're like, this is how it made me feel, and then they're like, oh, I understand how you feel now, so now I can like make an informed decision about how to do my options down the line. This one is like very explicitly like, here's the thing that you could do that would make me feel better. yeah, like I like where you're going, Games from the Wildwood, with this idea of like refuse to excuse them for their poor behavior or hold them accountable or something like that. Um, I'm having trouble imagining exactly what that would look like, though, in terms of like hold them accountable, because we've already called them out, right? Um, and we have like started this process of accountability. I think maybe for those we need to flip them so that they live um, in the amenders set of moves. Um, so to make amends, do these things, and so like acknowledging and when I say like acknowledging your error, I don't really want it to be the like really perfunctory like, oh yeah, I did this thing and it was bad, because it's really about like understanding why it was bad. Um, that is actually helpful. Uh, so like things like make an effort to understand the wronged party. To understand how you hurt them. Try to explain your actions to the wronged party. Right, and I don't want to have this all be about like groveling and bowing and scraping. I just need to make this font a little smaller. Because like even if you are in a position where you're making amends, maybe what you did had a good reason still, right? And so I want to leave room for that. Show concrete changes that you have made to your behavior. Offer a concession or show how you were also wrong. Right, which is kind of the like counterpoint to this one, which is like, here's why I did this, and here's why like what I did was right for me in that moment or whatever. And then this one is like, oh yeah, like I can see how like me getting so upset about it was whatever, or like yeah, me wanting this thing was maybe unreasonable or whatever. So like that we end up with some, meeting in the middle and reconciling of these characters. I mean, I think there's a temptation to want to make it so that these moves connect, right? So it's like you say this and then they say that. But I like the idea of like both people are trying to solve this thing, but in different ways, and they're like working, um, not really like working in parallel. Like they're diverging on these different axes of trying to like fix stuff because they each have their own way of trying to do it. Um, so for now, I don't want to necessarily like bind options together where it's like they're going to do this thing and then that's going to trigger you doing this thing. I think a lot of the times naturally they will snowball that way. Um, but sometimes the characters will just kind of be like diverging in their seeking to solve the issue. Um, and then here's the final thing to this, which is like, cool, we resolved the clock. Like, say these are all my moves that we, or all my options that we have for ways to fill in the clock. Um, yeah, the idea of like, you know, people in conflict don't always actually communicate very well. Um, and sometimes it's just like we keep talking and like eventually we stop feeling so bad, but we haven't actually been very effective in our communication. Is totally a way that conflicts can get resolved, where they just like run out of steam. Like, I just don't have the energy to be mad at you anymore, even though I don't feel like we really got anywhere. Um, it can go down that way as well. I don't want to have these like be gated too much. Like, I would love for it to just be like, this is going to basically take a set amount of time, and it's either going to get resolved well or poorly, or whatever. Like, it's going to resolve, right? There's like a, we have started it. It's going to end. It doesn't just drag on forever. It's like a finite thing that you can only sustain for so long. Um, and I don't want to make it so that like people are just like, and we have to have scenes about this, and we have to have scenes about this, and we have to have scenes about this, because it's going to take over the game in a really shitty way. I would like for these to be more background things that kind of like progress incidentally, that we don't need to like chase super hard. So it might be that I need to make some changes at some point to hammer that out. But then the big question now is payout. What happens at the end of the conflict when we fill that clock? What do we actually get? Um, Obvious answer is a bunch of links or something. Um, I have some thoughts. So, based on your role, you can fill in the clock by doing prescribed things. They're like wronged party things and things you do to make amends. Great. Um, while the conflict is ongoing, you cannot gain links with each other. So here's another like thing of like, y'all should figure this out, because it's messing with your jam. There's definitely going to be some kind of mechanical payout where they like get links with each other or whatever. And then like maybe there's a playbook move or something where like you get some benefit for resolving it at the last possible moment, like while fighting the baddies and stuff like that. Or maybe that's cooked into the move itself, and that's like a strat that you can have for for an arc where you can be like, yeah, we're gonna be like fighting in this arc, and we're gonna like have a lot of trouble getting along, and then like if we resolve it at the right, like if we time it nicely and resolve it during the monster fight, then we get this like big money payout. I feel like that's probably a special for a playbook, but that it's a fun one. While the conflict is ongoing, you cannot gain links with each other. When it resolves, is it like the wronged party assigns? I think, yeah. So when it resolves, the wronged party chooses X from a list. And then there will be some payouts of like links, stress healing, etc. See, Maderick, the issue there is that we start getting to like positively resolved. So then there's like a negative resolution or a weak resolution, which is turning this into this, like, it's starting to become a Leviathan for a like apocalypse engine move. It's starting to get really big. It's already feeling pretty bloated with what we have now. If I need to start characterizing the outcome mechanically, which might also be at odds with the fiction, I feel like so the reason I've worded it this way is that I feel like the best way to encapsulate that idea, which I do agree with, is to say one player gets to decide, and how they feel about it will stand to represent all that stuff. The idea of like, how did this resolve, and all of that. So there's like this move about being in a fight, which has an extended bit that's almost really another move, where it's like when a fight ends, when you are done arguing, when you resolve an argument, you get this thing. And so then we need to look at what our payouts are. So obvious payouts are things like links, stress recovery, I feel like that's it. I feel like really all we need to worry about rewarding you with mechanically is links and stress recovery. Or strain recovery. It's not called stress in my game, because John Harper beat me to it, or it totally would be stress. Maybe I'll just call it stress, whatever. But anyways, so we get links and we get HPs. Links being our like currency that lets us do shit. Yeah, like something where for the remainder of the session you get some bonus when working together. Could be good. Take +1 when working together for the remainder of the episode. And an episode encapsulates all the lead up time and then the monster fight time, and then your episode's over. Or well, and then there's the like denouement time. So like some obligation and downtime phases, the battle phase, the like XP resolution stuff, boom, that's an episode. So maybe you would do like 2 episodes in a session, or maybe it would take several sessions to do 1 episode. I think instead of working together, this should be when battling together, or when fighting the darkness together. Take +1 in battle together. In battle while working together. I don't know if this one relates to the idea of like investigating the darkness and stuff like that. I don't know. That doesn't feel appropriate based on how those ideas have been delineated in my head thus far. And like I don't see where their understanding would come from, because what they're fighting about, you know, may or may not relate. But still, this is pretty good for one sitting. It's kind of a general framework for this move. Still, it's not like hasn't been cleaned up. Um, yeah, like, so here's the other thought, right? Is right now I'm thinking about payouts, but it could be that like there's fallout from resolving arguments as well. So maybe like some there is some smattering of good things, and there's also like a negative consequence that someone has to take on. Um, Fallout / negative consequences. And so, like, even if you successfully get through this, there is still some kind of consequence. Or maybe this comes in where you're rolling dice while doing this stuff. Because generally, when you're rolling dice, it is costly, right? Like, a lot of the moves have a cost associated with them. And there's always the chance that you'll fail, and there's always that risk. So, if this section is requiring you to make rolls, it could be that that's enough of a negative consequence. Honestly, like that could result in us taxing the player's resources and creating drama, and that we don't need to then also have the player who like comes out successfully at the other end, the wronged party gets to choose if we're using that framework. Then it's like if we have to pick some good payouts and then there's some negative stuff, that could get really dicey and bad. It could just be like too much badness that it wouldn't be worth doing this thing. But that's something to think about, because I think it could be interesting to have it be muddy at the end, right? Because real conflicts don't resolve cleanly. So the more I think about it, the more it like seems appropriate that there would be. So maybe it's that the payouts include negative and positive. In any given entry. So this is getting really big, this move, which is another thing we must be wary of. But it's not going to take up this much space in the final version. We can edit it down to be more concise. So, I kind of like the idea of either tying negative things to the positive payouts. So it's like no matter which option you choose from the payouts, there's going to be a downside to it. It's just that like you're getting a lot of good and there is some bad. So that would be things like, like you get 5 links with them, which is a ton, but also like they suffer 2 stress. Or invert that, like you suffer 2 stress and they gain 5 links with you. Depending on how we want to frame the power of choice. And we might even have it be like you choose which option, but they choose who gets the good thing and who gets the bad thing. So, Games from the Wild, it's basically how I'm thinking about this is as 2 moves that are like intrinsically connected. Because you'll never be able to resolve a conflict with someone, a conflict clock, unless you have done the move to make one. So they'll be in the same entry, but they're essentially 2 separate moves. You could even parse it out as 3 if you wanted to. Because really, the first move, all it does is create the clock and set your roll. How you deal with the clock is kind of its own mechanical thing. which like operates independent of the other one. It's like connected but not dependent on it exactly. Um, and then the payout section is this other whole thing. Um, this is a big, complicated mechanical thing. Um, it might be that it is too much of a Leviathan, that it's just like too huge a mechanic to like work well in Apocalypse World style games. Um, the other thing about this, right, is that like this is me trying to make like the hypnotic move is so clean. Um, it's like intent is very clear. It's hypnotic is still probably the most complicated move in Apocalypse World, and it's not it's not taking nearly as many words to describe as my bickering move is over here. Um, which might be a matter of me needing to edit it, but like my move is including like two two separate groups of lists, and like it makes a clock, which is this other thing, which then like doesn't really directly relate to one of the lists, and um yeah, like this move is very large compared to what we are basing it on. And like yes, I'm trying to do more, but that might be my mistake, is trying to do too much with one move. Yeah, we shall see. We shall see. I'm kind of running out of time today, so we're gonna park it here. But um, felt like we made some good progress. Coming up with new mechanics is really tricky, and I don't even feel like it's appropriate for me to try to do it all in one sitting. Um, yeah, this is like turning into a very complicated minigame, and I'm sure there are some ways that we can clean it up and like edit it down and make it more streamlined, and probably eliminate whole sections of it. Um, One thing that's really standing out to me as not necessarily needing to exist is this whole idea. Like maybe we just have the clock, and when people do things which folks at the table decide are appropriate, like things that should advance the clock, the MC advances the clock, and that's it. Like we just run it like a clock in Blades, where there aren't a lot of rules around it. It's just there's like a general rule of how you arbitrate clocks, and then the MC just does it, right? Um, Having mechanics be at the like whim of a person is a much simpler way to encapsulate them, and ultimately is still totally legit, because like everything comes down to people making choices anyways. How much we frame their choices and their options that are available to them is a stylistic decision. So it could be that we just have it be like the MC is like, yeah, that seems like this advances the clock a little bit, like y'all are resolving this thing. I like the idea of having some explicit things just so that I can chime in with like, this is how I feel about conflicts and how people resolve them. But how Impulse Drive handles contract payouts could be an interesting. Yeah, like it kind of has that dynamic to it of like we. This is almost like you're doing a gig or a job or a score, and then there's like a payout, right? Like that framing is not at all inappropriate as a like way of thinking about it. Um, and so parallels like that might be worth looking into. Um, but yeah, I'm gonna put this on hold for now, and like think about it, sleep on it, come back to it. Thank you all for coming by and like chiming in with your thoughts and feedback and all that. I really appreciate it. Uh, yeah, it's helping. It's really helpful for me because this is all new to me. I've never done this before. I've never engaged with this discipline before, and so it's really easy for me to get lost. And having chatting around to talk to and stuff really helps keep me tied in and focused. Um, So yeah, thanks for tuning in, everyone. Not sure when I will next be able to stream, but it's seeming like my schedule for December is much more open, and so I'm able to do more of these. So keep an eye out in the coming weeks. It might be that I can do either Mondays or Tuesdays as a regular thing. All right. See ya.